Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel, and hi if you're new here. I'm Jade and it's time for February's reading wrap up. This might actually be one of the most exciting reading wrap ups for me because I just feel like I have had an amazing reading month. I can honestly say I have not disliked any books this month, and while I might like some more than others, it's just been great. So let me know as I go through these if you've read any of them, if you agree with my opinions, and if you haven't, hopefully you find things to add to your TBR because there are ones you should this month for sure. So without further ado, let me get on to speaking about the books I read. And the first book I read was The Frozen River by Ariel Lawhon. I reached for this right at the beginning of the month because we had snow, and this just kind of felt pretty atmospheric to just reach for and go to read, and it was pretty perfect. I won't say the book overall has like snowy vibes, but it starts with cold weather and a frozen river, so you know. So in case you've never heard of this book, it is historical fiction, I would say. It's kind of quite dramatic, so yeah, sort of like historical fiction drama, and it's set in the 1700s, so it has a bit of that older vibe, and you know, that time where women were quite oppressed. And in this book we follow a character called Martha, who essentially works as like a midwife. Back then, you know, the midwife would turn up at the house and help birth a child. She'd be sent for like a doctor in the village. There wasn't like hospitals or anything like that to give birth, so it sort of relied on these midwives turning up and assisting with the birth and being sort of trained in it, honestly, really from experience more than anything. As a midwife, Martha records like everything she ever does in this diary. So she kind of has a recollection of like all her work, all the births, all the deaths, you know, stillborns, etc. Like anything significant that happens, she writes down. And then there is an alleged rape of a woman, and Martha does sort of tend to her. After that, she becomes pregnant as a result of this alleged rape, and Martha sort of stands up for her. And honestly, I feel like that's all I can really say without giving too much away. There's a lot to do with the law and women, and you know how they're treated in the time, and obviously men and stereotypes back then as well, I guess. But what I really like is this book's quite balanced. There are some really good characters, there are some really nasty characters. It doesn't completely paint each gender as right or wrong or anything like that. So I think this makes a really cool sort of like balanced book, but it definitely has like a bit of that female empowerment vibe within it. And honestly, I just loved Martha as a character. Like, she made this book for me. I just think she was just such a nice, compassionate woman who was so dedicated to her job. So yeah, this story is also based on a true story, loosely based. The author actually writes about it in the book, which I think is really cool, that she really talks about the influence and where she got the ideas from. So if you pick the book up, that's all explained in the back, which I love. But if you like a bit of historical fiction with a strong female protagonist and a little bit of a sort of like, I guess, a little bit of like drama thriller aspect to it, then give this a read. Honestly, I give it 5 stars because I think for this genre, it's right up there. Then the next book I read was The Poet Empress by Shen. And just a moment for an appreciation of how beautiful this book is. I don't think it really shows you that it kind of shimmers in the camera, and then it has these gold sprayed edges. Although I will say they were kind of annoying. They were like really stuck together when I was reading them, and I was like having to peel the pages apart. And you know what? Before I even tell you what this book is about, I'm going to say, as you can probably see, I've given it a 5-star rating as well. But I'm going to boldly say this is the best book I've read so far this year. I know it's only February, but it is, and I think it's going to be up there with my top books of all time, and I think it will remain up there. I give 5-star ratings to anything I think is a very, very good embodiment of its genre, but there are some books that just stand out that even bit more. And if a 6-star rating did exist, there are a few books that may just get it from me, and this would be one of them. I do want to start out saying, before I talk too much about it, do check out the trigger warnings for this book. It's very deep, it's quite dark, and I know for the odd reader it can be very triggering. So this book is an epic fantasy, I would say. I think because of the front cover, a lot of people were expecting a romantasy with this, and honestly, I didn't really know what it was about before I picked it up, and it really wasn't what I was probably expecting at all, but in the best way, because as you can tell, I loved it. But we mainly follow a character called Wei, and she really wants to help her family. They're in dire poverty. There is a famine going on. She really wants to make life better for everyone. She wants to help her little brother get an education. And she decides, even though she's quite poor, that rather than do the stereotypical thing and try and marry a city boy to kind of gain a little bit more wealth, that she was going to go straight for the palace and offer to be a concubine for the heir of the throne. The actual emperor is sick, this is known, and so his son Coren is supposed to be taking over at some point. However, Coren's known to be very, very cruel, and this plays a huge part in the story. It's hard to say too much about the story without giving just so much of it away. I really feel like you have to experience it for yourself, but what I will say is the characters are very complex. Characters have to change and grow very rapidly. They are affected by their past. There is a lot about past and childhood and upbringing and how that affects, you know, your life in adulthood. There are honestly themes here of abuse, violence, and lots of different dark elements here. The reason it falls under fantasy rather than, like, you know, historical fiction, although I'd say it sort of has that historical fiction vibe, but I think it falls into fantasy because it sort of has a little bit of magic in there. But ultimately, I guess it is a story of family, friendship, trust, and deceit, and everything else that comes with, you know, confusing dynamics between people. I guess it's a fight for power, a fight for survival. And honestly, like I said, I don't really want to spoil any of the details of the story. I do think this is one you have to experience for yourself. But as I said, please go and check the triggers if you think it's going to be too much for you. Maybe don't read it, but if you feel like you can read it, I quite like being upset and affected by a book. I'm not going to lie. Like, I really like to feel those feels. It's not always the best feeling, but if something makes me feel something, it's done its job, you know? And I feel like you kind of, either you learn something from it, you reflect on it. I love that. And if you check the triggers and you think you can cope with it, honestly, this is one of my biggest recommendations ever, I would say. So another book I read was an autobiography, and that is Semi Well Adjusted Despite Literally Everything by Alyson Stoner. I sort of grew up with Alyson Stoner. You know, she was in a lot of the sort of like movies and TV shows that I grew up watching. You know, I mainly remember seeing her in Cheaper by the Dozen and Camp Rock, and she was also the little dancing girl in the Missy Elliott music video. That's kind of how she became famous, was for that dancing in the music video. She's an amazing dancer, and I get that maybe an autobiography won't interest you if you don't know who she is, but what I will say is I just think it is quite fascinating reading about other people's lives, and it can be really upsetting and quite dark, but I think it's important to know what other people go through, and I find it quite fascinating, like, you know, sort of experiencing lives through that person's eyes, which is so different from my own. As usual, I've given it a 5-star rating because who am I to judge someone else's life? And I found it super interesting to listen to all the good, the bad, and the ugly that she has been through. You know, there is definitely a lot wrong with the, you know, fame industry, especially for children. I'd like to think that it's getting better in this day and age because most, you know, memoirs that I read are people that are now adults, and I can only hope that it's at least a bit better for children these days, although I very much doubt it's perfect. But yeah, she essentially tells of her life and growing up in fame and the struggles to be perfect. So definitely worth a read if you're at all a fan. Then the next book I read was Wild Love by Elsie Silver. This is my first Elsie Silver read, and I did realize quite quickly that apparently, like, it's sort of like a continuation of her Chestnut Spring series, but they're kind of just like interconnected standalone, so it didn't matter that I hadn't read the others. But at first I was like, oh god, have I done this the wrong way? But the story made total sense, and I could tell at the end of this one that then the second part to this series, because this is book one, the second part of this series would just follow another character's story. So, like, again, you don't have to exactly read them in order, although I'm guessing it might be better to. I did a whole reading vlog on this for Valentine's sort of week, so if you're really intrigued by this book or my opinions, please go and watch that. But just a quick summary. But yeah, this is essentially a billionaire romance, and, you know, that sort of hot billionaire vibe. And we follow a guy called Ford and also a woman called Rosie, who is his best friend's sister. I guess they had a little bit of a thing for each other in the past, but they'd never acted on it. Rosie returns to town, sort of on a break from her career, and she does currently have a boyfriend, but she doesn't really have many feelings for him. and then they kind of work things out after he offers her a job to help her like stay in town, and his life gets more complicated when a daughter he didn't know he had shows up. Overall, I did really enjoy this book. The only reason I gave it 4 stars instead of like anything higher is, I'm not gonna lie, my favorite character was the daughter. I thought the daughter, Cora, who's meant to be 12, was written so well, and I kind of just wanted to read about her and her story, to be honest. I found it quite fascinating, and yeah, I just found her the most endearing character, and I was like, maybe I shouldn't feel like that about the book. Like, the protagonist should probably be who I want to read about and whatever, but I just wanted to read about the daughter. So that's the only reason I didn't give it any higher, but I did really enjoy it. And I did mention in my vlog, I do feel like this is sort of influenced by 50 Shades of Grey. The characters definitely give that kind of vibe, and then there's these like flirtatious emails and things like that. It's not quite as explicit as 50 Shades of Grey, but there are open spicy scenes in here, so if that's not your thing, probably not for you. But if you don't mind that, I'd say this is a good one to pick up. And then my next read was Gone Before Goodbye, which is written by Reese Witherspoon with Harlan Coben. I believe it is Reese Witherspoon's like debut novel. For Harlan Coben, obviously famous writer, but I can honestly say I haven't actually read any Harlan Coben novels. I do have one on my TBR that actually my mother-in-law gifted me, but I haven't read it yet, so I don't have like anything to compare, so I can't really say how much of this is Reese Witherspoon and how much of this is Harlan Coben. But I have watched quite a few TV shows and stuff based on Harlan Coben's books, and I always enjoy them. I love a good sort of like mystery thriller drama thing, so for me, like, I do really enjoy the shows, so I had really high hopes for this book when my book club chose it, and I certainly enjoyed it. I've given it 3.5 stars, which I think is my lowest rating of the month, but it's still good. I still really enjoyed it. The only reason I did that is I just felt there were so many twists and turns in this book that some of it lacked a bit of explanation, and I just kind of felt like, oh, another one, another one. Like, I feel like it would have been a bit more impactful if there was just slightly less twists within the novel. And that's not usually something I would say, but it just felt like every few seconds I was getting a new one. But the story is about a surgeon called Maggie, and she has lost her license, so she is not allowed to operate on people at the moment. However, she is requested by some rich, kind of reclusive billionaire or trillionaire or whatever he is. She's requested by him to perform some surgery for him and also his mistress, and she kind of gets taken away to this very remote place, and things kind of go on from there. One other important thing, which was a very interesting part of the story, is that she had not that long before lost her husband, and her sister, who works sort of like trialing AI things, had turned like this app on her phone to like an AI version of him that had all his memories, so that she could basically still talk to her husband, which, you know, is so unhealthy when you think about it. But it added a really interesting dynamic to the story. And obviously it becomes quite relevant to the plot. But essentially, after she agrees to do this surgery, without giving too much of the story away, things escalate. She sort of becomes in danger. There's lots of twists and turns with who has what motives for what, or why she was picked to do the surgery. There's so many things to it. So it's a good one. Like, I wasn't bored at all, but I just feel like, when upon reflection, I just felt like there was bits that I still wanted answered, that just felt a little bit maybe incomplete, or as I said, just a few too many twists, whereas like, oh, again, like it stopped having any shock value anymore. But like I said, kept me very engaged. I just think there's some slight things I changed. There was a lot in this plot for the length of the book. Then my next read was For Whom the Bell Tolls by Jaysea Lynn. Again, appreciation for how beautiful this book is. It's absolutely stunning. Now, if you watched my 5-star prediction video, I did predict this as 5 stars, but I gave it 4.75. So it was really, really close. And, you know, when I talk about it, I'll explain why it just wasn't quite perfect for me, but I obviously still loved it. So this book is written from a dual point of view. One point of view is Lily. She is a young girl who is dying of cancer, and then essentially this is about her journey into the afterlife. Lily arrives at the afterlife. She doesn't really know what to do, and she ends up just assisting in hell as like a job, even though she's granted like paradise, but she just wants a purpose and something to do. And then we also follow Belle, who is a demon. He is a general for the army. So there is a lot of world building in this book, and I think the world is amazing. So honestly, that's the one thing that really hooked me in and made this book feel very unique. I thought it was a really unique concept of the afterlife, like a really cool idea that, you know, hell isn't really evil, it's just where evil people are sent to sort of be rehabilitated, I guess you could say. I guess you could say it's quite dark and a bit of punishment too, but it doesn't really go into that because we're following Lily's story within the afterlife and she's not a bad person. So yeah, we also follow Belle, this demon general, as I said, and there is a lot of unrest. So apparently there are other sort of worlds with afterlives and they can sort of fight each other. And so essentially they have to have like an army to protect them, and Belle is the general of this army. And then naturally, obviously, Lily and Belle start to fall for each other, and it creates a whole story. And Lily sort of adopts basically a young girl that has recently come to the afterlife and is kind of fearful. And it really creates some really heartwarming moments, which is something else I absolutely adored about this book. I thought all the characters were written really well. Like I honestly loved all of them. I just think all the banter between characters, everything was just great, and all the feelings and the sort of respect they had towards each other. Like honestly, all the characters, like all the main characters, were just really nice. What I will say, it is a little bit on the spicy side, and there's a lot of like obscene language. There's many obscene sexual jokes and sexual sort of language used throughout the book, and I kind of liked it in the fact that, you know, the characters were just very comfortable with themselves and they had no shame in that. But at the same time, the reason it wasn't perfect for me is I just feel that maybe it was a little too much. I'm like, okay, I get it, they're all horny, like I get it. And there was just this one scene where it was just a little cringe for me, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I like having this in here. And it's very minimal, which is why I'm not like saying I hate the book as a result or anything like that. But I think just it just made me not want to give it quite that 5 star, because that I think I would have changed. But I still think this is an amazing book, and if you enjoy your fantasies and you don't mind that little bit of spice, definitely give this a read. It's not like loads and loads of spice, it's just a little bit on the risque side most of the time, especially like I said with the sort of language used. But I think the world building in this is stunning. It's so clever, and I could really visualize it in my head. And as I said, quite a unique concept. So I loved it overall. And then the next book I read was an arc that I was kindly gifted from the author, and it's one of the best arcs I've read in ages. So that is Soulfyre by Samantha Nell, and honestly, I really love this one and I highly recommend it. It is written from a multi point of view, but mainly from 2 characters. And firstly, we follow Eris, who is betrothed to a rather cruel prince, and honestly is living quite a miserable life, and like you kind of feel for her, I guess. The reason she has been betrothed to the prince is they suspect that she could hold some sort of great power. Not that it seems to be a thing, but that's what they believe. So that's why she was originally betrothed to this prince. And then we also follow a guy called Taran, who is sent from his boss to kidnap Eris. He doesn't know why, it's just a job for him. However, when he goes to kidnap her, they run into a bit of trouble. She ends up saving him, and then he questions the morality of everything. And with a bounty on their head, they decide to try and flee to a different continent. However, things are complex because Taran is in fact oath-bound to his boss, so he can't really escape him. And this story is essentially about their physical journey to another continent, but also, I would say, a journey through becoming themselves, getting to know themselves, developing as people. Like there's quite a lot to it. But ultimately, what I really love about it is it went straight in with the action. It like hooked me immediately, which I love. Like I do enjoy world building, but sometimes I just want that action to grab me and we just start and we're in the story. And I would say this is quite an easy read, but in the best of ways, because I just, as I said, I was immediately hooked. It was easy to follow. I really enjoyed the characters. I really liked our 2 main protagonists. It does end on a cliffhanger, so it's going to be a bit frustrating waiting for the next book. But, you know, I highly want to read the next book. I'm definitely involved in this story and really invested in it. So I had to give it a 5-star rating, and I would definitely recommend it to you. It comes out on the 24th of March, so it's not long from now. It's actually 2 days before my birthday that it comes out, and I actually want the physical copy for my birthday because I want it for my shelves. And then my 8th read of the month is A Gathering of Shadows by Schwab. This is a 2nd book in a series, so I can't talk too much about this book because obviously I don't want to give things away for people that haven't started the series. But in case you're wondering about the series in general, it is the Shades of Magic series. And what it is about is kind of these magical realms, but they're like slightly different. So there's different versions of London, for example, and they call them like colors. So it's like red London, white London, for example. However, there are these magical beings called Antari that can change between worlds. So it's kind of like parallel versions of the same places, but they're different, they're separate, and only the Antari can travel between them. However, Antari are really, really rare, and that's kind of part of that first story. I did speak more on this in a wrap up a few months ago when I started the series, so please go back to that if you're interested, because as I said, I don't want to like say too much about this one. What I will say, which doesn't give too much away, is there is sort of like a slight introduction of like trials in this one, and I do like a good trial trope, but it's not like trial heavy. It's definitely not like a huge focus of the book, but I did really like that addition. But again, it ends on a complete cliffhanger, so I've got to carry on with part 3 sometime soon, although I've got a lot of books that I really have lined up for March, including a few arcs that I've promised to read, so hopefully I get to this. It might be April I get to part 3, I think. But as you can see, I gave this 5 stars. I gave the first part 4 stars because it had a lot of world building and I found it a little bit slow at first, if I'm honest, but now that I'm in the world, it has me hooked. And then my final book of the month, if you can't tell, this is quite an old book of mine, but it's Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I haven't read this for ages. As you can see, very old book of mine, very basic edition of the book as well, not very pretty, but I bought this years ago. And I used to really love the story of Wuthering Heights when I was younger. I always enjoyed it, and so it was just something that I felt like I wanted to reread with this whole movie coming out. My intention was to go and see the movie actually only last week, but I couldn't because they changed the times at the movie theatre and it didn't work with my work schedule at all, so I couldn't make it. But I am determined to watch the movie at some point, just because I've heard quite a lot of weird things about it. Like that it's very different. It's more just like a very loosely based thing on Wuthering Heights, and I kind of just wanted to refresh my memory of the story because it's literally been years. I think I was a teenager last time I read this, and as you can see, I enjoy it. I gave it 4 stars because it's not like my favorite classic, but it's still a great story to me. I know a lot of people struggle with it, and I don't think it's for everyone, but I do think a huge issue is people go in thinking of this as a romance, and it really isn't. It's often listed as a gothic romance, but I would call it a gothic tragedy. It's about family dynamics, it's about abuse, it's about anger, it's about how your childhood affects you in your adult years. It kind of goes to show that often people are sadly a product of their environment and how they're treated. And then it has all the gothic elements because it has ghosts, it has haunting, and you know, ultimately they're all haunted by their past, regardless of actual physical haunting. As I said, this book is all about how the past shapes the future. But I think the story is really clever. It makes a lot of commentary on, you know, social standing of the time and relationships and how you treat each other. But also we have quite unreliable narrators in the book. It's not ever told by the sort of main characters of the story. You know, like most people, even if they don't know Wuthering Heights, have heard of Kathy and Heathcliff and probably the Wuthering Heights song by Kate Bush. And I think they always visualize that as some like epic romance story when it really isn't. For me, it's a great book, but I do understand why some people don't get on with it. But if you haven't read it and you have been considering it, just be aware I don't think it's a romance. It's a lot more than that. It's very deep and you have to really think about it. But that is everything that I read over February. So 9 books. I think, as I said, one of my strongest months ever because I've definitely had one of my top books of all time. There's a few of them, I've got to say, but it's definitely up there. But I had that with the Poet Empress and plenty of other 5-star reads that I feel are so good for their genre, or at least high rated reads this month. And as I said, I didn't dislike anything that I read. So yeah, really happy with this month, and we'll see if March is as good. If you didn't see my TBR jar video from last week, that will give you a bit of an insight to what I might be reading in March and might appear in March's wrap up. But yeah, let me know any book recommendations. Let me know if you like any of these books or if any of them pique your interest. And I will see you again real soon. Bye!